When I came home that morning, the house felt lighter, not in the good way, more like someone had reached inside it and scooped out the center. The air didn't smell like lemon oil and thread anymore. It smelled like nothing at all. Before we continue, make sure to hit the like button. Also tell us in the comments, what time is it where you are right now and which city are you watching from? I love seeing how far our stories travel. I set my toolbox down by the door and looked toward the sewing room, the one my wife Elaine used to call her corner of the world. Sunlight was coming in through the lace curtains, but it hit bare walls and empty shelves. Her sewing table was gone. The cabinet that used to hold jars of buttons, spools of thread, fabric rolled up like promises waiting to be kept, all gone. Even the rocking chair, the one I built for her on our second anniversary, had vanished. At first, I thought maybe there'd been a break-in, but the front lock was still intact and nothing else looked disturbed. The old radio sat where it always had, the stack of mail untouched, my coffee mug still half full on the counter from this morning. Then I saw the note, folded and propped against the sugar jar. It was written in my daughter's handwriting. "Dad, I had to sell some of Mom's things. Don't be mad, I needed the money. I'll explain later." I stood there for a long time, holding the note between my fingers like it was a piece of brittle glass. My daughter, my only child, had sold the last tangible pieces of the woman who raised her and done it while I was fixing Mrs. Leary's porch 3 blocks over. My throat went dry. I poured myself the cold coffee, drank it anyway. The bitterness helped me think. When Elaine died 6 years ago, I promised myself I'd keep her space untouched. The sound of her sewing machine had filled this house for decades. She'd make quilts for church raffles, mend jackets for neighbors, hem prom dresses for kids she didn't even know. She used to hum while she worked, little wordless tunes that filled the air like prayer. Now the hum was gone. The silence that replaced it was thick, like a punishment. I walked into the sewing room, my boots heavy on the wooden floor. The square of sunlight fell across the place where her table once stood, leaving a pale rectangle on the wall where her clock used to hang. I ran my hand along the windowsill, felt the faint ridges of dust where the edge of her fabric had sat. "Sold," I muttered under my breath. The word didn't sound real. I thought about my daughter, about the phone call she'd made last week. She'd said she was sorting things out, but I didn't realize I was part of what needed sorting. I'd raised her better than that, or at least I'd thought I had. I went to the closet, opened the door, and stared at the few things that remained. My old Navy uniform, a box of tools. Elaine's winter coat still hanging, there with her scarf looped through the collar. Everything else, her quilts, her photo albums, the hand-carved jewelry box I'd made her out of maple. Gone. For a man who'd spent his whole life building things with his hands, I'd never felt so dismantled. I sat down on the floor where her rocking chair used to creak. My knees complained, but I ignored them. I picked up one of the buttons that had rolled into a corner, tiny blue, shaped like a flower. I remembered the day she'd sewn it onto a little girl's cardigan at church. "No thread's wasted," she'd said. "Even mistakes can hold something together if you pull them tight enough." I turned the button over in my fingers until my eyes blurred. I wasn't angry yet. Anger's easy. What I felt was worse, a kind of hollow cold that creeps in before anger even knows it's invited. I looked at the clock. 4:17 p.m. The auction house in town would still be open. Mason's Auctioneers, that's where she'd gone, had to be. It was the only place around that handled household sales. I'd driven past it plenty of times, big red sign by the highway with a cartoon gavel. I used to joke that the place looked like a graveyard for furniture. Now it was where my wife's life was scattered to strangers. I stood, grabbed my jacket, and took the truck keys from the hook by the door. The metal felt heavier than it should have. The drive into town was quiet. Just the hum of old tires and the occasional whistle of wind through the cracked vent. I caught myself glancing at the passenger seat, the way I used to when Elaine was still alive, half expecting to see her thumbing through a pattern book or humming along with the radio. The parking lot was half empty when I pulled in. A bell jingled when I stepped through the door. Inside, the air smelled like dust and polish. Tables lined with trinkets, shelves stacked with mismatched dishes and old picture frames. Behind the counter, a man in a flannel shirt was counting bills. He looked up and gave me a practiced smile. "Afternoon, sir. Looking to buy or sell?" "Just looking," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He nodded toward the back. "Furniture and collectibles are through there. Estate items mostly." I wandered through the aisles, scanning faces frozen in faded photographs, dishes that didn't match, clocks that didn't tick. And then I saw it. A wooden spool holder, smooth oak, tiny brass hooks, one I'd built for Elaine 25 years ago. There was even the small chip in the corner where she'd dropped it during one of our moves. The tag read, Lot 112, Vintage Sewing Organizer, $30, $30. I reached out, brushed my fingers across it, and felt my chest tighten. That thing had held her threads longer than most people hold their promises. I turned toward the man at the counter. "You mind telling me who brought this in?" He looked at the ledger. "Came in with a batch last week. Estate sale from, let's see, M. Larkin." My daughter's married name. He didn't notice me freeze. He just went on, cheerful. "She said her father had passed and she was handling his things. Real nice lady." For a second, the floor felt like it tilted under me. I set the spool holder back gently, careful not to shake. "Appreciate it," I said, and walked out before my face could give me away. The sky outside had turned that late afternoon gold that makes everything look softer than it deserves. I sat in the truck with the engine off and watched the auction house door close behind me. "Passed," I whispered. "Guess I finally have, huh?" My hands tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I thought about what Elaine would have said, how she'd tell me not to waste my heart on anger. But she wasn't here to see this, to see her life priced in scribbles of ink and sold by the pound. I turned the key, started the engine, and looked at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. A tired old man stared back, eyes that used to be softer. "I'll find them," I said. "Every last thing." And for the first time that day, the emptiness inside me shifted, made room for something colder, sharper, more useful. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was the beginning of a plan. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the light off, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. The note from my daughter lay in front of me, smoothed flat so I could read the same 6 words over and over again. "Don't be mad. I needed the money." Needed. That word works like a knife if you hold it the wrong way. Around midnight, I made myself some coffee and opened the small notebook I kept in the drawer beside the stove. It was where I used to jot down grocery lists, phone numbers, things I needed to fix. That night, I started writing names. Mason's Auctioneers, Carl Mason, Lot 112. I underlined them twice. I'd built houses most of my life. You learn to read patterns, how beams line up, where stress hides, which cracks will widen if you ignore them. People are no different. My daughter had been fraying for years. I just didn't want to see it. By sunrise, I had a plan that felt small enough to seem harmless. Go back to the auction house, act like any other old man killing time, and find out who bought my wife's things. I wasn't going to yell or make a scene. I just wanted to know where the pieces went. Knowing is the first nail you drive when you're rebuilding anything. I shaved, put on a clean shirt, and drove back into town. The sign out front looked different in the morning, brighter, less like a graveyard, more like a trap I was walking into willingly. The bell jingled again when I entered. Carl Mason was behind the counter counting change, the kind of man whose smile is wide enough to keep you from noticing the boredom behind it. "Back again already?" he said. "Yeah," I answered. "Couldn't stop thinking about that spool holder. Figured I'd look around some more." He chuckled. "We get that a lot. Stuff sticks in your head till you give in." I smiled like I agreed. He didn't notice my eyes flick to the open ledger beside the register. Thick pages filled with looping handwriting and small check marks. The kind of book a man like him would never think twice about leaving in plain sight. He went back to sorting cash. I leaned forward casually as if checking a price tag. My eyes scanned the open page. Lot 112, sold, BH, cash, $30. Then another line below it, same initials repeated across half a dozen items. BH had bought nearly everything that came from my house. "Busy week for you?" I asked, trying to sound conversational. He shrugged. "Always busy. Never enough hours." "Looks like that BH fella spent a small fortune," I said, nodding toward the book. He followed my gaze, then quickly closed the ledger, smiling again, but tighter this time. "Regular buyer, antique dealer up north. Buys in bulk, resells online. Nice guy, always pays cash." I nodded like that was the end of it. "I see. You mind if I take a look around the furniture section again? Be my guest." He turned toward the back office, and I used the moment to memorize the scrawl on the page I'd just seen. BH, 198 Pinecrest Road scribbled in the margin. My mind locked onto it like a nail biting into wood. I spent another half hour pretending to browse, long enough not to raise suspicion, then walked out into the sunlight with that address echoing in my head. I drove home slow, thinking. The road to Pinecrest wound up through a line of old pines outside town, a road I knew from my years of hauling lumber. Small houses, most of them built in the 70s, each one leaning a little more than the last. I found 198 easily. A low green ranch with a pickup in the driveway and a hand-painted sign on the porch that read Holloway Antiques. So BHM, Ben Holloway most likely, wasn't just a buyer. He was a collector, a man who made a living off other people's attachments. I didn't get out of the truck, not yet. I just watched. Through the window I saw shelves stacked with old clocks and cabinets lined with glass figurines. Then near the back wall I saw something that made my breath catch. A framed piece of fabric with neat cross-stitching. My wife's handwriting turned into thread years ago. "Home is where you keep your promises." I remembered her making it one winter night, fingers working the needle while snow piled against the window. She'd laughed when she realized she'd run out of brown thread and used a bit of red instead, saying, "Even mistakes can look like warmth." Now that bit of warmth hung in someone else's window with a price tag. I drove home without knocking. I wasn't ready to face it, not like that. Back at the kitchen table, I reopened my notebook and wrote, BH, Ben Holloway, 198. Pinecrest Road, owns at least one of Elaine's pieces. The coffee had gone cold again. That seemed to be a theme lately. By afternoon, I called the county clerk's office. Old habit from my contracting days. You learn to love public records. I gave the address, said I was checking permits for potential renovations. The clerk rattled off property details like it was nothing. Owner's name, outstanding mortgage, recent liens. When I hung up, I sat back and let the information settle. Ben Holloway was 3 months behind on payments. His store was small, inventory heavy, cash light. That meant leverage. I closed the notebook and stared at the sunlight crawling across the table. Revenge wasn't the right word for what I was feeling. This was something quieter, more deliberate. I just wanted balance. To take back what was mine and maybe teach a few people the cost of calling someone else's memories junk. That evening I drove to the diner on Main Street, same place Elaine and I used to stop after Sunday service. I ordered black coffee and pie, sat by the window and thought. Carl Mason and Ben Holloway. Two men joined by ink and opportunity. Neither one evil, just careless in the way people get when they forget what things mean to somebody else. I wrote their names again on a napkin, circled them, then added another. Monsieur Larkin, my daughter. 3 people tied together by greed, debt, and convenience. I folded the napkin and slipped it into my pocket. As I walked out, the waitress called after me. Leaving so soon, Mr. Hayes. That's my name. Arthur Hayes. I hadn't heard anyone use it kindly in a while. Just getting started, I told her. Back home, I turned on the small lamp in the sewing room, the one that used to sit beside Elaine's chair. It was the only thing she hadn't touched, maybe because it was too ordinary to sell. The light made the empty walls glow like a blank page. I sat in the quiet and opened a new section of my notebook, labeled it Phase 1, Recover What I Can, Learn Who Profited, Buy the ground beneath them if I have to. My hand trembled as I wrote that last line, not from fear, from something else. Determination feels different at 72, it's heavier, but it burns steadier. Outside, the wind rattled the loose gutter. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The world kept going, unaware that one old man had just decided to tip it slightly back into balance. Before I went to bed, I pulled out the only photo I still had of Elaine and me together. The one from our 50th anniversary. She was wearing that soft yellow dress she loved, the one that made her laugh about looking like a walking daffodil. I set it on the nightstand. I'm not letting you disappear, I said to her face in the picture. Not piece by piece. Then I turned off the light, but I didn't close my eyes for a long time. I just lay there picturing that ledger on Carl Mason's counter. The loops of ink, the initials BH, the neat check marks beside every item that once carried her touch. Numbers never lied. They were a man's footprints in the dust. And I'd learned a long time ago how to follow a trail. I've lived long enough to learn that people pay attention to the noise you make and forget the silence you leave behind. That's why I kept quiet. The morning after I found Holloway's address, I went about my day like any other. Fixed the neighbor's gate, grabbed coffee at the diner, nodded to the same clerk at the hardware store. Nothing out of place. But my mind was turning like a saw blade that couldn't quite cool down. The next auction was Saturday. Mason's website said it started at 9 sharp. I got there half an hour early and took a seat near the back. The regulars were already gathering, antique hunters with baseball caps, couples clutching bidder cards, a few women with clipboards. The smell of old furniture and burnt coffee mixed in the air. Mason was behind the podium, cheerful as ever, calling everyone folks and friends. I looked around, scanning faces, wondering which one belonged to Ben Holloway. When the bidding began, I stayed quiet, watched. That's what I used to tell the apprentices back when I ran jobs. Measure twice before you cut. Lot 12, lot 19. I barely heard them. I was waiting for something familiar, something of hers. Then Mason lifted an item off the table, turned it toward the crowd. Lot 37, handcrafted wooden music box, plays Moon River. Sweet little piece, folks. My chest went tight. I didn't even have to hear the melody to know it. I'd built that box in 1974 from a scrap of cherry wood left over from a church pew. Elaine had cried when she opened it. It was the only time I ever saw her speechless. The auctioneer started the bidding at $15. A man in a brown jacket near the front raised his paddle. 15. I got 15, looking for 20. Another bidder, older woman, heavy glasses, lifted her card. 20. Do I hear 25? I raised my paddle without thinking. 25. Thank you, sir. We got 25 in the back. Do I hear 30? brown jacket raised his again. 30, we got 30, do I hear 35? I raised mine. The rhythm became automatic. 35, 40, 45. The sound of numbers layering like hammer blows. When Mason called out $50, the other man hesitated. 50 going once. He looked back, caught my eye. Maybe he saw something in my face, something that said, don't do this. Because he set his card down. Sold. Mason slammed the gavel. Lot 37 goes to bidder 42 for $50. It wasn't victory I felt. It was weight. Like every note of that song had been nailed to my ribs. After the auction, Mason boxed up my item, chatting the way people do when they think they're friendly. I paid in cash. He didn't ask questions. The music box sat on the seat beside me on the drive home. I didn't play it right away. Couldn't. I just kept glancing at the box like it might disappear if I blinked. When I got home, I set it on the table, wound the brass key, and waited. The first note wobbled, thin from disuse. Then it found its rhythm. The room filled with the sound of Moon River, off-key but alive. I sat down and listened until it wound itself quiet. Then I said aloud, 1 piece down. That night I made a list of every upcoming auction Mason had scheduled. I circled the next 3 weeks. Every Saturday I'd be there, anonymous, silent, waiting. The following week I bought an old quilt that still smelled faintly of lavender soap. Elaine's hands had stitched those squares during our first year in Oregon back when she was learning to balance patterns and colors. The tag called it vintage patchwork. I called it home. By the 3rd week, Mason was nodding to me when I came in. Back again, huh, Mr. Arthur's fine, I said. He smiled. Arthur it is, you've got good taste. You a collector? Just a man with too much time. He laughed. Well, time's worth money in here. The ledger sat near him as usual. He'd turn pages, mark sales, scribble initials. I noticed every time a BH appeared, Mason's pen pressed deeper into the paper. Debt makes people heavy-handed. At home, my living room began to change shape. The quilt lay folded on the couch, the music box on the table, a sewing tin, a framed photograph, a small silver thimble, each item another step backward through time. The room felt lived in again, not haunted. But the more I restored, the more I understood that reclaiming things wasn't enough. The problem wasn't just that my daughter had sold them. It was the kind of people who made it easy for her. A week later, during another auction, I noticed Ben Holloway himself. Tall, lean, late 40s maybe. He had the kind of face that looks polite until you see the calculation in it. He bought in bulk, boxes of kitchenware, a stack of paintings, an entire set of lamps. When Mason called Lot 89, assorted linens, Holloway's paddle went up before the number even left the man's mouth. After the auction ended, he and Mason talked near the counter, heads bent close. I waited until they parted ways and Holloway headed for the door. Then I walked up. Mr. Mason, I said, you ever think about selling the business? He blinked. Selling? Looks like a good operation. Steady customers. I imagine the upkeep's a headache, though. Insurance, taxes, repairs. He laughed nervously. Who told you that? No one. Just a guess. He leaned on the counter. Why, you interested? Could be. I smiled faintly. I like old things. That got him talking, how the economy wasn't what it used to be, how he'd love to focus on his side projects if the right offer came along. I listened, said little, took mental notes. When I left, I sat in my truck and stared at the building. From the outside, it looked tired. Paint flaking, sign fading. But I could see potential. Beneath the wear was good structure. All it needed was someone willing to invest, and someone with a reason to. On the passenger seat, the music box sat next to the ledger page I'd copied from Mason's counter. I could still smell the old cedar from its wood. I turned the key in the ignition, caught my reflection in the glass. The man looking back wasn't smiling, but his eyes were clear. I thought of something Elaine used to say whenever I hesitated to start a project. If it matters to you, it's already half built. I looked at the auction house again. Half built, I murmured. Let's finish it. The plan, once vague, had shape now. Phase 1 had been finding the pieces. Phase 2 would be taking back the place that sold them. And somewhere, whether she knew it yet or not, my daughter was going to learn that when you sell a man's memories, you sell the right to ignore him forever. I started the truck and drove toward home. The sun was setting, gold light catching in the music box's brass key. It looked almost like a promise. You can tell when someone's ready to let go of something long before they admit it out loud. They stop defending it. They start talking about someday as if it's already halfway gone. That's what I noticed with Carl Mason. Every time I stopped by the auction house, he mentioned something breaking. The register, the roof, the air unit. Each story ended with a shrug. He was a man counting down without saying the number. I started dropping in more often, buying a small item here and there. Nothing big enough to make him suspicious, just enough to become familiar. "Arthur," he'd say when I walked in, voice almost warm now. "Back again? You're practically family." I'd smile. "You know how it is, Carl, old habits." Behind the small talk, I watched how he tallied receipts, where he kept the keys, how the ledger never left his sight. Watched Holloway too, his truck in the parking lot, his habit of buying more than he could carry, the way his voice turned softer when he was trying to cheat down a price. A few weeks later, I noticed the sign taped to the counter. "Inventory clearance. Everything must go." I waited until the last customer left and leaned on the glass case. "You closing up shop?" Carl laughed, short and tired. "Just trying to lighten the load before taxes, you know how it is." "Sure," I said. "You ever think about selling for real?" He studied me. "Why? You planning to buy?" "Maybe." I kept my tone even. "Place has good bones." He snorted. "You sound like a contractor." "I was," I said. 40 years building things that outlived their owners. Something in that made him stop smiling. "You serious?" "Depends on your price." He rubbed the back of his neck. "This old barn? You'd be buying headaches." "I've had worse." I took a folded envelope from my jacket and laid it on the counter. "That's my offer." He didn't open it right away, just stared at it like it might bite him. "Cash?" "Clean as it gets." He cracked it open, flipped through the bills, and let out a slow breath. "I'll need a few days to think." "Take your time," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." But I already knew he would take it. Debt makes decisions for you long before you decide. 3 days later, he called. "Arthur, if you're still interested, she's yours." By the end of that week, the paperwork was signed. Mason's auctioneers, every chair, shelf, and dust mote of it, belonged to me. I didn't feel triumph when I held the keys. Just a deep, quiet settling. Like something that had been bent too long was finally straight again. I showed up early the next morning and unlocked the door for the first time as owner. The bell above it jingled, the same way it always had, but it sounded different. Mine now. The room smelled of sawdust and lemon polish, the kind of smell that used to follow me home from the job site. I ran my hand along the counter, the grain of the wood smooth under my fingers. I could almost hear Elaine laughing somewhere behind me, saying, "You really can't stop fixing things, can you?" In the back office, the ledger waited on the desk. I sat down, opened it to the page where her life had been itemized. The ink was still dark, unrepentant. I turned a few pages one by one, reading names, dates, amounts. Mason had been sloppy, buyers, sellers, a dozen small debts owed to him and from him. Every story in town had passed through this book at one point or another. I added a new line at the bottom of the page. April 10th, transfer of ownership, A. Hayes. Then I closed the book and felt the weight shift. The next few days I worked like I hadn't in years. Fixed the flickering lights, oiled the door hinges, repaired the loose floorboard behind the counter. When I finished, the place didn't look richer or newer, it looked honest. Like itself. Word spread fast. Customers trickled in, some out of habit, others out of curiosity. I kept the old sign. Mason's name stayed up there. I didn't need people knowing it had changed hands yet. Quiet works best when it hides in plain sight. One afternoon, Holloway came in. He didn't recognize me at first. I was behind the counter, sleeves rolled, glasses on. "Carl around?" he asked. "Not anymore," I said. He frowned. "Who are you?" "New owner." He glanced around. "You buy the place?" "Something like that." He smirked. "Well, congratulations, hope you know what you're getting into." I looked him in the eye. "I do." He started browsing, same as always, flipping through boxes like he was panning for gold. When he wasn't looking, I opened the drawer under the counter. Inside was a folder, copies of every receipt tied to his purchases, each one a map leading back to something he'd taken. When he came to pay, I rang up his items without a word. He handed me cash, I handed him a receipt, and we both pretended it was business as usual. After he left, I opened the back door and stepped into the alley. The air smelled of rain and old wood. Across the street, the reflection of my sign shimmered in a puddle. I thought of Elaine again, her hands, her laugh, the way she'd say that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, it just meant putting the past in a place where it couldn't keep biting you. Well, I'd built that place now. Brick and board, key and ledger. That night I brought the music box to the office. Set it on the desk. When the last customer left, I wound it and let it play while I worked through the ledgers. The melody drifted out into the empty aisles, soft and deliberate. I started writing letters, small notes to people who'd bought her things, no threats, no anger. Just a quiet offer. If you ever wish to sell or return the following item, please contact the auction office. Most wouldn't answer, some would. But that was enough. Before locking up, I switched off the lights and stood in the doorway. The street was empty, the sign swaying gently in the breeze. From that spot, I could see everything, the front lot, the neighboring shops, even the reflection of the building's windows across the street. It hit me then. My daughter lived just 3 blocks away. She'd have to drive past this place every time she came into town. Let her see the lights on. Let her wonder. I closed the door and turned the key. The sound was clean, final. I was no longer the man who'd come home to an empty sewing room. I was the man who owned the ground where her betrayal had taken root. And somewhere between the ink and the silence, I felt Elaine again. Steady, forgiving, proud. The next chapter of my life didn't start with a bang. It started with a lock clicking shut, a song fading, and a man realizing that justice could hum as quietly as a music box. Owning that building didn't change the world, but it changed the air I breathed. Each morning when I unlocked the front door, the bell above it didn't sound like a welcome anymore. It sounded like permission. For weeks I lived in a quiet rhythm. Repair, restore, remember. Customers came and went, faces blurring together in the hum of small-town commerce. The music box sat on my desk, unwound most days, silent but heavy. Then one Tuesday morning, a familiar car pulled up out front. I knew the shape of it before I saw the plates. My daughter's silver sedan. She didn't park neatly. She stopped in a hurry, nose jutting into the street. The door slammed hard enough to echo. I stayed behind the counter and waited. The bell jingled as she stepped in, bringing the smell of cold air and expensive perfume. She was still in her business clothes, pressed slacks, neat blouse, eyes already sharp and tired. "Dad," she said. No hello, no pause. "We need to talk." I figured we might sooner or later. I kept my voice even. She looked around the shop, taking in the new paint, the reorganized shelves. "So it's true," she said. "You bought this place?" I did. "Why?" "Because it was for sale." "Don't play games." Her voice cracked around the edge. "You bought it to humiliate me." I wiped dust from the counter, slow. "You did that yourself the day you sold what wasn't yours." Her jaw tightened. "I told you I needed the money. You don't understand how hard things have been, the bills." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "What I don't understand is how you could take your mother's things and turn them into rent checks." "That's not fair," she said. "You weren't using them." I looked up. "Using them?" She blinked, realizing how that sounded, but pride wouldn't let her back down. "They were just sitting there, Dad, gathering dust. I thought—" "You didn't think," I said quietly. "You wanted a quick fix. You wanted to forget, so you made sure there was nothing left to remember." The words hung there between us, heavy as damp wood. She crossed her arms, eyes darting toward the shelves. "You're making a scene out of nothing. I'm not the villain here." "No," I said. "You're my daughter." That stopped her for half a heartbeat. I motioned toward the back office. "Come with me." She hesitated but followed. When she stepped inside, she froze. Elaine's sewing table sat there, polished, the music box resting on top. Behind it, along the wall, the quilt, the thimble, the framed cross-stitch, all the things she'd once called junk. Her hand went to her mouth. "How did you—" "I bought them back," I said. "One piece at a time." She took a step closer, fingertips grazing the quilt. You spent money on this?" "It's not about money." Her voice rose, brittle. "You think this makes you a hero? You think buying all this back fixes anything?" "I didn't buy it to fix you," I said. "I bought it to stop her from disappearing." She turned away, staring out the window. "You're cruel, you know that? Sitting here surrounded by her things, judging me. You don't know what it's like to fail, to need help." "I do," I said. "I know exactly what that's like. I buried my wife, I lost my home's warmth, and I failed to raise a daughter who remembers what love looks like when it costs something." Her shoulders shook, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She wasn't the kind who liked to lose control in front of anyone. I reached into the drawer and took out a small envelope. "Here," I said, placing it on the table between us. She frowned, picked it up. Inside was a copy of the receipt. Lot 112, wooden music box, $50. Her eyes darted over the paper. "What is this supposed to mean?" "It means I don't want your apology," I said, "just your honesty." She looked at me, confused. "You lied to them," I continued. "Told them your father was dead, that you were selling your family's estate. You didn't think I'd find out. You didn't think anyone was watching." Her lips parted, then closed again. "The man you sold through, Mason, he's gone. I own the place now. I've seen every line in his ledger, every name, every dollar. You didn't just sell things, you sold the truth." She sank into the chair across from me. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I said gently. "And I mean to forgive you. Just not today." That broke her. She hid her face in her hands, shoulders trembling. I let her cry. Didn't move, didn't speak. The sound filled the room like rain on an old roof. Soft, steady, cleansing in a way. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," I said. "That's the part you never learned. Not everything's a transaction." I stood and walked around the table, picked up the music box, wound it once. The first notes of Moon River drifted through the air. She listened, motionless. "That song used to calm you," I said, "when you were little. You'd climb into your mother's lap and ask her to play it again. Her throat worked, but no words came. I set the box down. I'm not asking you to be her, I said. Just don't make the world smaller by forgetting who she was. She wiped her face and stood. I should go. I nodded. You should. She walked to the door, then paused. Dad? Yes. Are you really going to keep this place? I'm going to keep what's left of her, I said. If that means running an auction house, then yes. She looked at me for a long time, then left. The bell above the door jingled softly like it was trying to apologize for the sound. When the echo faded, I sat down at my desk again. The music box had stopped playing, but the air still felt full. Outside, her car idled, then pulled away. Through the window, I saw her hand lift briefly, half a wave maybe. I lifted mine in return, though she probably didn't see it. For a while, I just sat there, the smell of dust and wood polish thick in the air, the ledger open in front of me. Next to her name, I wrote a single word, visited. Then I closed the book. The rain started soon after, tapping against the glass, slow and even. I leaned back in the chair, listening to it. Elaine used to say rain was just the sky trying to start over. Maybe she was right. Maybe we all were. I didn't see my daughter again for almost a month after that morning. She called once, didn't leave a message. I didn't return it. There's a strange peace in silence when you know it's finally earned. In the meantime, the auction house began to change shape, not just in looks but in purpose. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when an old man buys a dying business and starts treating it like a church. People stopped coming in to buy. They came to return. It started with a woman named Teresa O'Malley. I recognized her from the diner. Gray hair, sharp wit, always carried a tote bag full of knitting yarn. She walked in one afternoon holding a framed photograph. Mr. Hayes, she said, I think this belongs to you. She placed it gently on the counter. It was a picture of Elaine standing by her garden in spring. Sun hat tilted, a tulip in her hand. I'd taken that photo on our 23rd anniversary. Where'd you find this? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. Bought it at Mason's auction months ago, she said. Didn't know the story then. But when I heard what you were doing, well, some things shouldn't sit on other people's shelves. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded, throat thick. She smiled softly. Your wife looked happy. She was, I said. She had that talent. She patted my hand, then left without another word. 2 days later, a teenage boy came by on his bike with a box under his arm. My grandma said this used to be yours, he said, handing it over. Inside were 2 of Elaine's cookbooks, pages worn thin at the corners, her notes scribbled in the margins, measurements, reminders, little hearts next to the recipes she loved. By the end of the week, 4 more people had come in. A clock, a porcelain mug, a jar of buttons I hadn't seen since the sewing room was full. One woman brought a folded quilt square she'd found at a yard sale and said she couldn't keep it once she knew whose it was. It felt like the town itself was breathing her name again, piece by piece. I started keeping a small ledger separate from the old one, just names of those who returned something. At the top of the page I wrote, Kindness returns with interest. Each line had a name, an item, and one small note, repaid in grace. The shop began to feel less like an auction house and more like a museum. People stopped by just to look, to listen. I caught them whispering sometimes, stories about Elaine, about me, about forgiveness. I let them. Some stories belong to whoever needs them most. One afternoon, as I was fixing a loose frame, I noticed a familiar truck idling out front. Holloway's. He stepped inside, glancing around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. The shelves were cleaner now, brighter. The air smelled faintly of lavender from Elaine's old sachets I'd found in a drawer. "Well, look at this," he said, forcing a smile. "Didn't think you'd last more than a month, old-timer. Word is you're giving stuff away now." "I'm not giving anything away," I said. "Just putting things back where they belong." He snorted. "That's no way to make a living. Not everything's meant to be sold." He leaned on the counter, close enough that I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You think you can shame me buying this place out from under Mason? I made him money. I made you money." "You made memories into merchandise," I said. "But I'll give you credit. You were efficient." His jaw tightened. "Watch it, old man. I know where half this junk came from. Maybe I'll tell your daughter what you've been up to, see how she likes it." I met his gaze and didn't blink. She already knows what I'm up to. She just doesn't know what it feels like yet. He stared a moment longer, then laughed quietly. "You've got some steel in you." "Didn't expect that." "I built houses," I said. "You learn to carry weight." He left without buying anything. I watched his taillights fade down the street and felt a strange calm settle over me. That man had lived his whole life chasing ownership, and he didn't understand that I'd already won by letting go of the chase. A week later, the local newspaper printed a small piece. "Retired carpenter restores town auction house as memorial to late wife." They called it the Memory Exchange. After that, donations poured in, not money but stories. Old couples brought wedding china they didn't need. Widows brought photographs of husbands long gone. Children brought small trinkets they said felt important. The place became something else entirely. Every Saturday, instead of auctions, I hosted open hours. Folks came, shared coffee, swapped stories, sometimes left with nothing more than the sound of a song or a kind word. I'd play the music box quietly on the counter. Moon River became our anthem, and for the first time since Elaine died, I started laughing again. Real laughter, the kind that sneaks up and surprises you. One evening, as I was closing up, I found a letter slipped under the door. No return address, just my name written in my daughter's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the counter beside the music box and turned the key, letting the melody fill the room. The notes rose and fell, patient as a tide. When the song ended, I unfolded the paper. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said. You were right. I sold more than things. I sold what I was afraid to remember. I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I'd like to visit. Not the house, not the store, just you. M." The edges of the paper were damp where her hand had pressed too long. I read it twice, then set it on the ledger where I kept the names of those who'd returned something. I wrote her name underneath. Next to it, just 2 words. "Still coming. That night." I stood in the doorway of the shop as the street lamps flickered on. The glass reflected my face, the shelves behind me glowing soft gold. For once, the silence didn't ache. The town had turned, not toward me, but toward something bigger, toward remembering what mattered. And as the rain began to fall again, I whispered into the empty air, "She'd like this, Elaine. She'd really like this." The bell above the door chimed once in the breeze, as if someone unseen had agreed. I didn't plan for her to come so soon, but grief and guilt don't run on anyone's schedule. 2 weeks after I found her letter, I was polishing the front counter when the bell over the door gave that small, uncertain jingle. When I looked up, she was standing there. No armor this time, no sharp eyes, no clipped voice, just my daughter holding a small paper bag against her chest. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence between us wasn't cold anymore, it was cautious, like a bridge just built and waiting for someone to step on first. She cleared her throat. "I brought something." I nodded toward the table near the window. "Let's sit." She followed quietly, the heels of her shoes clicking against the floorboards. When she sat, she placed the bag on the table and slid it toward me. "It's not much," she said. "But I thought maybe—" Her voice faltered. "Maybe you'd want this back." I opened the bag. Inside was a small tin of buttons, each one different, colors mixed, some cracked at the edges. I knew them instantly. They were the last of Elaine's sewing buttons, the ones that used to roll under the couch no matter how many times she tried to keep them sorted. "I found them in the garage," my daughter said. "In a box I hadn't unpacked. I guess I couldn't throw them out after all." I lifted the tin, turned it in my hands. The metal was cool, the lid slightly dented. "She'd be glad you kept them," I said. She looked down at her lap. "I didn't keep them for her. I think I kept them because I couldn't admit what I'd done. Most of us lie to ourselves before we lie to anyone else," I said. "It's easier that way." A faint smile tugged at her mouth, gone as quickly as it came. "I read the article in the paper," she said, "about the store, about Mom's things coming back. People were talking about you at the market. What were they saying? That you turned this place into something good, that you made everyone remember what matters." She hesitated. I wanted to see it myself. I nodded toward the shelves. "Then look." She stood and walked slowly through the aisles. Her hand brushed along a row of framed photos, quilts, small pieces of china. Every few steps she stopped, eyes catching on something familiar. When she reached the sewing table, she froze. The sunlight through the front window hit the wood just right, the varnish glowing like honey. The music box sat there, closed. "May I?" she asked. "Go ahead." She wound the key, tentative, like she might break it. The melody spilled into the room, slow and wavering but true. "Moon River." Her eyes shone and she laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard from her in years. "I used to dance to this," she said, "right here in the kitchen while she cooked." "I remember." She turned to face me. "How did you find all of this?" "One person at a time," I said. "People came. Some returned things they bought, others brought stories. I just listened." She nodded, biting her lip. "I'm sorry, Dad, for all of it. For selling, for lying, for staying away. I thought I was drowning. I thought money would fix everything." "Money fixes roofs," I said, "not hearts." She let out a shaky breath. "Can you forgive me?" "I already did," I said. "You just hadn't shown up yet to hear it." She looked down at her hands, then back at me. "I don't deserve this." "Maybe not," I said, "but your family, you don't earn that, you keep it alive." We stood there for a long while, the music box humming its last few notes. When it stopped, the silence felt full instead of empty. I walked to the ledger on my desk, the one I'd started after taking over the business. I opened it to the last page. At the top, I'd written in careful letters, "Debts repaid." I picked up my pen and added her name again next to the note I'd made weeks before. This time I wrote, "Returned the last of her mother's buttons. Stayed to listen." Then I closed the book. She came to stand beside me, watching as I locked the ledger in the drawer. "You're really keeping this place open?" "As long as I can," I said. "It's a good place for stories to land." She smiled faintly. "Could I help? Maybe handle the books or something?" "You'd want to work here?" "I think I need to," she said. "It feels right." I didn't answer right away. I just nodded because that was enough. Outside, the light was fading, the kind of amber dusk Elaine used to call the forgiving hour. It made everything look softer than it was. We stood in the doorway together, the town quiet except for the sound of wind through the street. "Dad," my daughter said, "do you ever think she knows about all this?" "Yes." I looked at the glowing windows. at the sign above the door swaying gently. "She knows," I said. "She's in every note of that song, every piece that found its way back." We locked the door and walked to the curb. The street lamps flickered on one by one, casting long shadows that stretched toward the sea. As we reached her car, she turned and hugged me. Not a tentative embrace, not a polite one, but a real breaking kind of hug. The kind that forgives without asking to. When she drove away, I stood for a long time, hands in my pockets, listening to the hum of her engine fade. Then I went back inside. The air still smelled like lavender and old wood. I sat behind the counter, opened the music box, and let it play once more. The melody filled the room. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying the past. I was resting in it. When the last note faded, I whispered, "We're all right now, Elaine." I turned off the light, locked the door, and stepped outside. The stars had come out, scattered like the buttons she used to collect. Different shapes, all shining in the same quiet sky. The ledger was closed, and for once that didn't mean an ending. It meant peace. If this story touched you, take a moment before you scroll away. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting peace stay. If you felt that, make sure to hit the like button and share this video with someone who still believes in second chances. And tell me in the comments, what did this story remind you of? I read everyone.